The Forbidden Room at my grandmother's house urban horror story. My name's Mia, and before I tell you what happened, just know this isn't something I wanted to remember. Some things from childhood are supposed to stay buried. Some doors ain't meant to be opened. And at my grandmother's house, there was a room nobody talked about, not even her. Growing up, that house was the center of everything. Birthdays, cookouts, cousins running through the hallway, uncles arguing over spades, women gossiping in the kitchen like it was their second job. That house felt alive. It smelled like old wood, bleach from endless Saturday cleanings, and that permanent haze of cigarette smoke that sat in the walls like an ancestor that refused to leave. But there was always one part of that house that felt wrong. Even back then, a room at the end of the hallway, a room Grandma kept locked, a room nobody ever went in, the kind of room you walk past faster without realizing why. I used to ask her about it. She never answered. She'd just say, "Don't worry yourself about things that ain't your business," and that would be the end of it. But this story ain't about when I was a kid. It's about the night I went back. The night everything shifted. My grandmother passed when I was 32. We weren't close like we used to be. Life just happens like that. But her death hit harder than I expected. So when the family left after the repast, I stayed behind alone. I wanted one last night in the house that raised me. The neighborhood wasn't the same. Gentrification hit it like a wave. Coffee shops where old barber shops used to be. White lady jogging at 11 at night like she ain't scared of nothing. Condos where the park used to be. But Grandma's house, it stood stubborn, still black, still ours. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. The city outside had softened, but the air inside felt heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. I walked the hallways, touching the picture frames with all the faces I grew up seeing. Aunties with high-top wigs, uncles smiling with gold teeth, kids in church outfits they hated. But when I passed the old grandfather clock, the same one that used to scare me as a kid with its deep, echoing tick, I felt a breeze slide across my ankle, a cold one. No windows open, no vents nearby, just that clock. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses do that. They settle, they breathe, they move in ways that don't make sense. But the draft kept coming from behind that old clock, strong enough to make the hair on my arm stand up. And something in me, some old childhood instinct whispered, "Check it." So I did. I pulled the clock away from the wall, and that's when I saw it. Not a crack, not a gap, a seam, thin, straight, hidden under the wallpaper. My finger brushed across it and hit metal. A latch, cold as ice. My whole body paused. I should have walked away. I should have respected the silence my grandmother always kept. But trauma makes you curious, and curiosity makes you stupid. I pulled. The wall groaned like it had been asleep for decades. A small wooden door swung open, barely shoulder height, and a wave of air rushed out, thick and sour. Not death, but old, wet, like something that had been waiting. I lifted my phone flashlight and crouched inside. The crawl space stretched farther than it should have. Boards creaked under me, long, tired creaks like the house was warning me with every step. And all I could think was, why did Grandma hide this? Why didn't anybody know? I reached the end of the narrow hall and stepped into a small room carved out beneath the house. Concrete walls, a single hanging bulb, a rusted metal table, a chair. But the real punch to the chest? A long corkboard on the wall, covered in photographs, all of children, black children. Some smiling, some not even aware their picture was being taken. Each photo had a date written on the back in thick black marker, the handwriting shaky but familiar. My grandmother's. I felt my stomach flip. Then I saw her, a girl named Tasha, who had lived 2 blocks away. She'd gone missing when I was maybe 10. I remember the posters stapled to telephone poles. I remember my grandmother shaking her head and muttering, "Baby didn't stand a chance." But she did stand a chance. She just never walked out of this house. My hands were shaking as I looked around. In the corner stood an old steel cabinet, chipped paint, rust around the handles. I opened it. Inside were small objects lined up like trophies, kids' stuff. Barrettes, a tiny sneaker, glasses with one cracked lens, beaded bracelets. My throat tightened. I wanted to throw up, run, something, but I couldn't move, because on the bottom shelf was a box, a small metal box dented on one side. My fingers barely worked as I grabbed it. It slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor, popping open. Inside was a knife, black stained, not rust. Blood, old soaked-in blood. I stumbled backward, hitting a small wooden table. A drawer slid open. Inside was a journal, black leather, spine cracked like it had been opened 1,000 times. I flipped through it. Names, dates, ages, notes, all written in my grandmother's handwriting. Precise, cold, clinical. My grandmother, the same woman who fried chicken every Sunday, who yelled at us for slamming doors, who danced to Maze and Frankie Beverly every summer. She kept track of these kids like they were experiments, like they were nothing. I dropped the journal. It slapped the floor, pages fanning out across the concrete, and then a floorboard creaked above me. Someone else was in the house. I froze. I was supposed to be alone. Everyone had left hours ago. Nobody had a key except me. Another creak, slow, heavy, controlled, like someone who knew exactly where to step. I turned off my flashlight. All I could hear was my own heartbeat slamming in my ears. I backed into the crawl space and moved as quietly as I could. The footsteps moved toward the hallway, toward the clock, toward me. I crawled faster, scraping my knees on the wood, splinters digging into my palms. I reached the door, pushed it closed, and dragged the grandfather clock back into place. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped, right on the other side of the door of the room we were never allowed to enter. I didn't think. I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispering what I found, begging them to come fast. When they arrived, I showed them the spot behind the clock, but when they peeled back the wallpaper, there was nothing. No latch, no seam, no door, just smooth drywall. I clawed at it until my fingers bled. I yelled until my voice cracked, begged them to look again. They didn't. They left. And the house got quiet again, dead quiet, until tap, tap, tap from behind the clock. I didn't wait for a fourth. I grabbed my keys and ran, didn't pack a thing. I drove until sunrise. 2 weeks later, I sold the house, cash offer, no questions asked. Why I'm telling this, there's no proof of what I saw, no photos, no documents, nothing I could show the police, just memories, and this one truth I can't ignore. My grandmother wasn't the sweet old church lady everyone thought she was. She hid something beneath that house. She hid children. And the way those footsteps moved that night, that wasn't her. That wasn't an old woman. That was someone stronger, taller, deliberate. Someone who already knew the house better than I ever would. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in my new apartment, I swear I can smell that same cold, stale air drift across my face. And if I stay awake too long, I hear it again, tap, 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 like something knocking from behind a wall that isn't even there. I used to think the worst monsters were out on the street, but the older I get, the more I understand. Sometimes the monsters are in your bloodline. Sometimes they raise you. Sometimes they build rooms behind walls. And sometimes they don't work alone because somebody else was in that house that night, and I think deep down they're still out there, waiting, and the room at the end of the hall she wouldn't allow anyone to enter turned out to be totally empty. Maybe. If this story hit too close to home, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts below, and subscribe to the very best YouTube urban horror channel, Sites of Horror, because out here, the streets remember, do you? If you want the chills to keep hitting, go ahead and run that next video.